Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank our witnesses. I want to follow up on what the chairman talked about. It's concerning to me, not just the dynamic that's happening between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but the support that Iran is providing to Yemen. That, to me, allows them to do the things that they're doing that are very, very disruptive in that area. As we know, they've looted UN food convoys. They've laid over 1 million mines in civilian areas. They've recruited thousands of child soldiers and have taken over the closed U.S. embassy. They're holding at least 11 former U.S. embassy staffers hostage, and they've stepped up cross-border attacks by drones and missiles against the UAE that have actually targeted and killed civilians in the UAE. And as the chairman pointed out, they've completely rebuffed efforts by the current administration to enter into any kind of talks to resolve these particular issues. General McKenzie, I want to go to you first and ask, what are your thoughts about what we can do in interrupting the relationship between Iran and the Houthis, which allow them, unfortunately, to continue to keep this unsettled state in Yemen, and that in turn antagonizes the Saudis, and this just continues to escalate? Can you give us your perspective on that?
Sir, I can. And I'd like to note at the beginning that while the supply of humanitarian aid to Yemen has been imperfect and not consistent, throughout the long history of this crisis, Iran has never imported a single bag of rice or any other foodstuff into Yemen. Yeah. In fact, the only material they brought into Yemen is stuff designed to kill people. Yeah. So we should just remember that when we talk about the people here. Sir, I believe there's an opportunity for a negotiated settlement here. I believe that I believe that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and I believe UAE are open to that solution. I believe that the Houthis have an opportunity should they choose to negotiate, but under prompting from their Iranian masters, they have instead chosen to double down. They continue their attacks into Saudi Arabia. As you noted, they have ramped up attacks into UAE in a very disturbing new phase of operations. But I think there is an opportunity here under the UN, under the United Nations, to get to a truce, and a truce would be the best of possible worlds. We would be able to begin to open Hodeidah, get foodstuffs into Hodeidah, and distribute it under the auspices of someone other than the Houthis and their ability to interfere with it.
Can enough pressure be put on Iran and Saudi Arabia to kind of force the Houthis to the table and say, listen, you got to resolve this?
I don't believe it's in Iran's interest to end the war in Yemen. I think it's a fairly low-cost war for them. As you noted, it embarrasses Saudi Arabia, it embarrasses UAE, and I think they're actually not motivated to do that right now. I think it is certainly in the Houthis' best interest to cut a deal. So the ball's sort of in their court. They have some opportunities. They need to seize those opportunities because, frankly, sir, I don't think those opportunities are going to be there forever.
Yeah, thanks. Let me ask you briefly, too, about the growing threat from ISIS-K in Afghanistan. As we had heard before, by a complete withdrawal of forces there, we knew that the risks were going to increase. Obviously, they have. The concern is that that risk is going to extend beyond the borders of Afghanistan, that they'll have an opportunity or a capability to pursue attacks outside of Afghanistan. That is incredibly troubling. Also, our ability to do significant CT operations in Afghanistan, the issues of what we used to have as far as human intelligence, signal intelligence, greatly degraded now. The over-the-horizon capability is just not something that's realistic in relation to the threat that we face. I wanted to get your best military judgment regarding the adequacy of the current force structure in CENTCOM following our departure from Afghanistan. What do we have in place? Is it enough with this over-the-horizon capability to really keep a handle and keep ISIS-K from growing to a point where it can perpetrate attacks outside the border there? And what are the risks with our current force structure? What are the risks that are there before us today, and how do you think those risks will continue to grow?
Sir, in the closed session a little later this afternoon, I'm going to exhaustively drill down into our force posture and all the disciplines of intelligence that we're applying in Afghanistan and give you very detailed and specific, granular answers to those questions, but I prefer to do that in the closed session. I will say that we are very concerned about the potential for ISIS-K growth in Afghanistan. We assess that they do retain a desire to attack us in our homeland here in the United States, and absent effective pressure, that threat will only grow and metastasize over time.
Okay, very good. That's one I want to get to, is that you continue to see it growing then in the years to come unless something significant is done in the meantime.
Sir, and I'll talk about that in great detail a little bit later today.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Wittman. In accordance with the Chairman's extraordinary